All right, should be recording now. So today we have Skeptical Christian joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your online persona?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a Christian.
Right.
You kind of tease me on that here and there, but I grew up a Christian. I was young. My mother was a Christian in a fairly liberal, it's called the United Church of Canada, and it's like Anglican Episcopalian sort of fellowship like that. It's pretty large. I think for decades, it was the largest church in Canada. But I mean, they're gay friendly and all of that pretty much now and stuff. So that's they're fairly liberal. But so that's kind of where my mom grew up in. So she kind of told me about God a lot when I was a kid. And we kind of it was in our heads, just assumed all the time and in our conversation casually, but there was nothing really serious. And we went to church here and there. And as I grew up, we'd go, once in a while, not very often. Mm-hmm. But we believed in God and just assumed all of those, the fact that he was real and that. But I don't know how old I was, 16 maybe. And she was invited to a Nicky Cruz crusade near where I lived here in Alberta. I don't know if you know who Nicky Cruz is.
It doesn't ring a bell.
David Wilkerson in the 50s or 60s was in New York City. He's a pretty major Pentecostal preacher. And he went in through the streets of New York and tried to get gang members off the street by preaching the gospel and feeding them and whatever. And The Cross and the Switchblade it was a very, very popular book. Mostly it started in the 70s, I think. But anyway, so Nicky Cruz was this kid that was converted out of the gang scene in New York in that time. And so he started his ministry and he was on crusades. And so we went to one of those. My mom was invited. At the time, I would have been a little bit younger, maybe 14, 15. And then, so she was invited and I went with her. And it was, of course, pretty emotional, pretty compelling. Those conversion stories from such wicked lifestyles to this Christian existence is pretty compelling when you aren't thinking very hard or whatever, and you kind of grow up already believing in God. So anyways, it was pretty moving, and my mom was very impacted, and I was as well. And we went up and went to the altar and all of this stuff. And so after that, we started to go to the local Baptist church and got serious. Like we thought we had become Christians now, so typical evangelical Baptist church, altar calls every week. And you'd go up. I can't remember who you were talking to. I think it was maybe the apostate, but regular altar calls. Well, maybe this hasn't stuck, so let's go up again, and the emotion driven. And the guy was a good preacher. He was, but so we were serious then. And so that was a couple of years. I was getting a little older, later teens, 16, 17, and out putting tracks on vehicles and all of that kind of thing. And I was locked in the bubble. So that's kind of where we got serious about Christianity and thought this was something worth giving your life away for. So that's
how old were you?
Well, it was a transition, but I think I was probably 14 when we went to the event, and then we started going a little bit casual for a short time. So I was probably 15 when we got pretty serious, 16, 17. And the last couple of years of high school is when I was putting tracks on vehicles and, going to Bible study and youth group and all the typical gung-ho stuff. So, that lasted for quite some time, but that's how it started.
Yeah, that's interesting to mention the tracks. I remember in college, I was John Piper had these tracks. It was like they were like little booklets. Like it wasn't even like a track. It was like it would say like "For Your Joy" like on it. It was like this little red book, and I was like,
I don't know if I saw that one.
Yeah, I was like putting them all over my campus and stupid places too. Like, like on the way, like I would like pray and be like, God, like lead someone to this track, And I think I put it like, there's like this path to the dorms, and I would like lean them up against trees, like along the way.
Oh yeah, it's strategic, man.
Yeah.
I mean, God's sovereign, but you got to be strategic.
Yeah. I got a litter,
That's right. Yeah.
Let's see. So
And you don't want to
another thing,
waste your life, right? Don't waste your life. So
no, got to put tracks everywhere.
yeah.
So, but that kind of jog, you were talking about like what the trajectory that made you more serious was kind of like this revival experience almost.
Yeah.
It seems like, I mean, it still happens now, but it seems like that's tapering off, like in the culture a lot.
Yeah.
Is that just because, I mean, I guess it was just more culturally Christian and back, earlier, and now it's not? Like, why do you think that whole kind of...
You got to remember that I remember it coming on, once every couple of months on television, like main television station, Billy Graham crusade would be on, right? And it was a regular event, and it was a big deal. And so we watched it all, when it would come on TV or whatever. And it was common. It was like, okay, this is expected. Mm-hmm. And I think the culture was so saturated with that Billy Graham evangelism style that it wasn't like I don't know if most people weren't put off, right? I mean, like you say, there was a cultural aspect there. And everybody, even the wicked sinners, well, they knew that, oh, you're following the good book and you're doing the right things, and that's God bless you, but really there was no serious opposition because it wasn't culturally appropriate to put opposition to Christianity, I don't think, really. Even though I think the US is quite different than Canada, but we kind of get the overflow from all of your media and all of your goings on. So it kind of overflows to here, and it's not as probably extreme in a lot of ways, but pretty similar.
Right.
But yeah, so that revival, that altar call, that evangelical swell was everywhere. And I mean, the Pentecostals really ran with it, I think. And that's like this Nicky Cruz came off of David Wilkerson's. And actually, until my wife and I were pretty heavily into David Wilkerson's prophetic. He went back to New York City in the late 80s, early 90s. And so we would get tapes sent from Times Square Church all the time to where we were living in BC. And yeah, it was, so, I mean, I think that Billy Graham generation just carried on, and it was still going on in the 80s. And you've mentioned this elsewhere, but I think the internet has broken down some of those things that, oh, we can go check stuff now. We see opposition to this now. And part of that is quite cultural, I'd say, but just, you can challenge things now. So yeah, that revival, that type of altar call, even in the churches, the altar call stuff every week, I think it's tapered off big time because, well, I think the Reformed influence on Christianity and in the West is that, okay, you guys in this decisional regeneration and this altar call Christianity, there's been a big pushback in general in evangelicalism, but it's still there probably.
Vinny. Yeah, well, the other thing I was going to say is, I mean, with the cultural aspect, is it seems like there's less of this idea that religion is good for its own, like in its own, for its own sake. Like that maybe there would be like this idea, like you said, with people that weren't Christians, like they would be like, they knew that Christians were, following the good book and all this. Like people don't take for granted that religion is good inherently anymore. Like they may have in the past. So
yeah, I mean, I think the new atheists are part of the big shift there, even though they are, I guess there's not much depth there as far as argumentation or whatever, I suppose, but there's a big shift there where, I mean, 9/11 and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, people just don't, it's not assumed anymore, I think.
Right. Yeah. So why did you, what made you get a Twitter? Like, you started, I don't know how long you've had it, I can't remember, but what was kind of the thought process to start going on Twitter and doing the stuff you do on there?
Probably to go after Calvinists.
That's my follow-up question, but I was going to see what you said.
I'm just trying to remember. My son was on it, and I think he mentioned something about it and whatever, and I think that's why I got on. But then, of course, you start looking for the areas and the themes that you know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And I can't remember. I tried to remember today when I ran into you guys, you and Amateur Exegete and a few of the guys that are in our circle, sort of. And I can't remember. I don't remember when I ran into you guys.
Well, it was for me. You were, I think. Well, with me, Amateur Exegete just found my blog randomly, and we interacted. This was before I had a Twitter, and okay. We kind of started talking through that, and then I saw that he had a Twitter, and I was like, maybe I can do that. But I think the first post I ever posted, I had like no follow. You were like one of the first people I was talking to on Twitter other than Amateur Exegete.
Okay.
Because I posted that blog post about Calvinism, and it was like going through the confessions and stuff, and you commented on it or something. I think
probably
maybe he shared it and you saw it on his Twitter, on his feed or something.
Yeah, but I can't remember the initial, but you started tagging me in your posts, and I was very appreciative. But it's good stuff.
Yeah. That was a couple of years ago, but yeah. One of the OGs right here.
Yeah.
It seems like it seems like the trolling of the Calvinists has waned a little bit. Why is that? You get blocked? I think you got blocked a couple of times by
that doesn't bother me. That doesn't bother me. You want an honest answer? Maybe I brought a friend here, my Ardbeg 10. I'm just gonna
You're good.
But no, to be honest, you go in the circles that you know, right? And I forgot to start this out because I was going to ask you a question. I was supposed to ask the first question.
Oh, that's fine. This can be a co-interview. You can ask me whatever you want.
So after interviewing all the smart people, and some are well-trained and well-read, what the heck have you got me on here for?
But I already answered that question.
That's a deficiency I have. Is I am undisciplined as far as reading, and so my investigation of stuff has been more cursory, more surface, more shallow, not as deep and disciplined, and that as it should have been in all the levels that I've come through. But so I mean, when I'm going after the Calvinists, I felt comfortable there, right? The reason I felt comfortable is because I was a Calvinist for several years, and there was a process getting in there, and there was a process getting out. But so I was comfortable with it. But you ask why that's kind of waned, probably because, now, because I mean, all these stages that I've been through, I've had to challenge myself to get out of evangelicalism. I had to say, okay, wait a minute. Here comes a challenge. I'm going to not just shut it off and stay in my bubble. I'm not going to just be quiet. I'm not going to just ignore this. Now I have to face it. And so when you start facing things, evolution, climate science, on and on and on, those type of things were probably first. Then you go, biblical studies, scholarly, textual, critical stuff. When you let yourself do that, you can change your mind. And so what happened to me is, first of all, I changed my mind and became a Calvinist. So now you've made a radical shift. So I was a Calvinist for several years. Then I ran into the Orthodox Christology. Well, now my Calvinism is in doubt, right? Because you've already allowed yourself to be challenged. Now you have to be honest with it and say, okay, here's a challenge. I got to face it. I can't just ignore it, lock into where I am. It's easier, but I couldn't do it anymore. So there's always somebody smarter than you. And so if you let yourself listen, it's pretty easy to change your mind on things. And so, I felt comfortable in the Calvinist stuff for quite some time, and I still do, and I still do it for fun, kind of sometimes, but not as much, probably because honestly, I'm not locked in there. I've had too many challenges that I'm allowing myself to be open to about the existence of God, about, I can sit and argue all day long with, a Calvinist or whatever. And, but now you got to back up your challenges and say, well, what about Christianity itself?
Right.
Those are tough questions. And, I've let myself be challenged all along the way. Why would I stop here?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like, maybe I kind of identify with what you said, where it's almost like when you change your mind about anything major, whether it's becoming more conservative or whatever, it's like something changes about you. Maybe not for everyone, but definitely for me, because like I was not always a Calvinist either, and I changed my mind, because you start to like really realize like, hey, I could actually be really wrong about what I deeply believe. And like once you realize that, it is kind of hard to keep that, packed down and like stuffed down, because after you've changed your mind on a major thing, you always have that in the back of your mind, like, what about this? Could I be wrong about this too? It's almost impossible to turn that off.
I got to the place where I've said to myself and to my wife, I said, I can't even trust myself anymore. So, and some part of that is good, because just look at the Trump evangelicals. I mean, they're locked in. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say. You can say anything. You can give evidence. You can show stats. It doesn't matter. You can tell them they're not pro-life, that they're just anti-abortion. It doesn't matter. They don't care, because they're locked in. And I got, I look back and I say, I got sick of locking myself in.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's always a smart person coming along to challenge your thinking, and you can either listen or ignore them. And it's hard work to listen, because you might change your mind.
Right. So do you want to go, you've already kind of explained, do you want to like lay out your theological evolution a little bit more in depth? So you're at this stage where you're in a Baptist church, like then when did you start to kind of move into like the Calvinism, like what happened for you that made you think that?
I think somewhere along the line I heard White Horse Inn.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it was Horton and the boys, and I found that quite compelling. And, wow, they drank beer and they smoked. I mean, that was really radical and crazy. And no, actually, it was the intellectual side of Christianity. It was somewhat not shocking, but you don't get much of that in a typical evangelical church, right? It's
right.
So to hear that, and to have this loftier view of God than I'd ever seen. I mean, I was never comfortable with I went through Pentecostal and charismatic circles, and I was skeptical of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go into all that stuff, even when I thought, okay, I think this is probably accurate and true or whatever, and you're trying to speak in tongues or hope God will give you these gifts and stuff like that. But this lofty view of God that Calvinism provided was pretty compelling. And this strong historical connection. Now I think it's weak.
Right.
It's not very strong historical connection, because they go to a certain date and basically stop.
Right.
Right. This is the Reformation Christianity. But they added 500 years that the evangelicals couldn't, in my mind.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, there was some compelling historical connection. All of a sudden, this thing felt a little bigger than me and my church. So that was compelling. And it was more intellectual and less emotional. So those things kind of brought me in, and I started listening to White Horse Inn, and I guess about 1998 or so, 1999 probably, I became, 1999, I was a little worried about Y2K, because I got on a couple of books and a little tangent there about the Y2K stuff. And so it was, even professionals were a little unnerved, some of them, but then I became a Calvinist in 1999 and couldn't have cared less. Like all of a sudden that didn't mean anything to me. It's because, I've got this lofty view of God. He's sovereign. I got nothing to worry about, and it was a weird sort of a thing. But so that was about 99. And so I never did go to a Reformed church. I went couple of times just to visit, and they were probably some of the most rude and obnoxious people, but cold. But that was the place I went to. But anyways, so I never did go to a Reformed church. I went to a Baptist church that had a strong Calvinist member in the leadership. So it was kind of split. The church is split. It's still there, and it's still the same way. It's in my city here. So I went there for several years, promoting and defending Calvinism there. Mm-hmm. And it was quite comfortable because it was pretty traditional. It was more hymns than choruses, and it was conservative, not crazy, and yet it wasn't shallow. So it was pretty comfortable for where I was at. And so I guess you call me a Reformed Baptist then, pretty much. So.
Yeah, I was kind of taken in for similar reasons. Like I started with like Piper and Tim Keller and all that stuff, but then kind of got sucked into the more, like I was reading a lot of Horton and just the people at Westminster Seminary, California. I mean, the other Westminster too, but like I started reading more in-depth stuff like that, and Calvin, and it was kind of like a gateway drug, as you would say, Piper and the team.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to hear R.C. Sproul do some of his stuff on, and not afraid to connect himself to the ancient church, even though now I think it's a sham. It's so selective. The Reformed connection to the early church is very selective, and I like to go after it wherever I can. But it was still, at the time, for me, it was like, ooh, wow, this is big and broad and heavy and substance, and this isn't not my evangelicalism that I grew up in, and I kind of like it. So, yeah.
Yeah, you were mentioning the coldness that you experienced at that church, or the one that you visited, and I don't know. This is complete speculation, but I've often wondered to what degree personality plays into like theological views. Ultimately, it really seems like kind of like, at least it seems like there's a lot of like engineer types that become like these confessional Calvinists or something like that. Like it just seems like I could be totally wrong about that, but just my perception of it seems like your personality really has a huge role in playing like what kind of stuff you find compelling, and anyway, that's my
it's true
speculation.
No, it's real. It is true. It is true. I think, again, because of the constant and incessant division, even in Reformed circles, there's always another avenue you can go where we're Calvinists, but we're warmer. And usually it was the Reformed Baptists, right? Mm-hmm. That's where you'd find your warmth and outreach and that type of stuff. But you're right. Yeah, they were cold as death.
Yeah. So who introduced, so you were a Calvinist, and then you started the historical connection you started to see was weak in the Christology issue. What brought that to your attention exactly? Like, was it a specific person like making these arguments? How did that even come on your radar?
I think when the Pope died. When the Pope died, Pope John Paul died. I forget what year that was. When he died, everybody, well, I don't know. The media was riveted with this process, right? And I remember going online and I forget where it was. I think it was more blogs at the time, commenting and saying, well, I don't know what the big deal is to you guys. Pope John Paul wasn't a Christian. You know what I mean? He's in hell. What are you guys, this is pathetic. Yeah, there's lots of beauty and it's compelling and blah, 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 blah. But he wasn't a Christian. He didn't accept justification sola fide, by the alien righteousness of Christ imputed to him through faith alone. So I was going after it. And anyways, it wasn't long after that I think right in that time period, I was interacting a little bit with Catholics because of this. Mm-hmm. Right. So there was, what was first here? I can't remember. Um, the Catholic debates with James White was one of the early things, and there was a lot of them, or others, but there was several with James White, and so I said, okay, I'm going to go see the Calvinist, go take the Catholics on or whatever. And I know I mentioned this to Amateur Exegete one time, and he didn't think it was quite so pronounced, but I still say that James White got his ass handed to him over and over and over again. Like, I was shocked. Like, I just, okay, these Catholics, these guys aren't stupid. Like, they've got something here that's making me a little nervous. So it was first the Catholics, and then and thoughtful, bright Catholic bloggers. Called to Communion was a Catholic blog that I was on quite a bit just after that, and like really, really higher end, thoughtful, careful, Irenic, warm, engaging Catholics defending their faith and interacting with the Reformed. That's what the site was about, interacting with the Reformed. So you'd get all the Reformed and the TRs on there, trying to shut them down and whatever, and they're getting their butts handed to them too, but there was one guy, he was a philosophy teacher, and I don't know if I should say his name, but he had his own blog, and he's Orthodox. Well, he was taking on the Catholics. So now I'm going, well, wait a minute. Okay, first of all, I'm just saying, okay, it's either Rome or my Calvinism, right? And so all of a sudden, here comes this Orthodox guy, and he's smart. Like, he taught philosophy, I think, at the University of St. Louis. I'm not sure what it's called, but so he's a pretty smart guy. And so anyways, I followed him for quite some time, and so again, here I go. Oh yeah, now I got to decide between Orthodoxy and Catholicism.
Right.
So that's kind of what happened. I forgot your question. Was there something more specific I'm missing?
No,
but yeah,
it's your evolution.
It's the Christology. So I was hearing the Christology mostly from the Orthodox and from the Catholics as well when they would interact with the Reformed, challenging them on certain things. Mm-hmm. And in certain regards, the Orthodox and the Catholics basically agree. Not always in fine details, but basically agree against the major things that I was holding as a Calvinist, so, but that Christology started to take down my Calvinism, because like this guy would say, he would saying, well, what you do to us in our humanity and human nature, speaking of total depravity or specific election and these type of things, whatever you do to us, you do to Christ, because we're consubstantial with him. So you have to bring the ancient church used Christology as a grid to discern where to go as far as what heresies were presenting. When they were presented with a heresy, they didn't go to the Bible. They used scripture, but they said, okay, what does this do to Christ? Because we know here's the Christology we believe is true. Here's the triadology that we believe is true about the Trinity. If it violates those things, then it can't be right. So that's kind of what started taking down my Calvinism. I mean, the liturgy was beautiful, and there was an element of, in Orthodoxy, there's no performance. Mm-hmm. I mean, from the outside, as an evangelical, you say it's all performance, it's rote, but there was no sermon that you had to whip people up, or you didn't have to, oh, that was a good sermon, that was a good sermon. No, nobody cares about it. This is the liturgy, and we're meeting with God. You know what I mean? So that was compelling, deeply historical. I was laughing at what the Reformed were complaining or claiming as their historical depth. Well, now I just got the supreme depth of Christian history. And there's a totally different view of looking at things in the Eastern churches than there is in the Western church. Like, Rome and Protestantism are kind of two sides of the same coin, arguing about the same sort of things, just coming out in a different place. Whereas the East, it's just very different, very different. So, I mean, but it was the Christology that took down my Calvinism. So.
Do you want to
So I headed
briefly
off to Orthodoxy because a smart Orthodox guy came along and
do you want to briefly lay out? So you said, I mean, you kind of touched on it. Well, what you do to us, you do to Christ. Do you want to briefly lay out the issues with Reformed Christology as compared to like Orthodox Christology?
So basically, the ancient, like, you look at some of the stuff in Calvinism, like, I just wrote down a couple of notes here, but you know, the Sixth Ecumenical Council dealt heavily with what did Christ have for a will? Was it one will? Was it two wills? And so the church ended up rejecting monothelitism. It's a heresy that either, there's different versions of it. Either Christ has one will, the divine, or he has a divine will and a human will according to each nature, but the divine will overrides or determines the human will. And so it's a heresy of monothelitism. Well, when you apply that to Christ, like, I would always ask a question to the Reformed, saying, so do you think Christ has free human will? And if you say no, you're in trouble. If you say yes, you're in trouble, because we are consubstantial with him. He's getting his humanity from us, from his mother, right? So he doesn't get it from heaven. He doesn't get his human nature from special creation. You know, he gets it from us. So there's a Christological principle that all of a sudden takes you away from the scriptural grenades. You know, usually what the response you get is, well, the virgin birth. Well, so do you think sin passes through the sperm, or like, you know, what does the virgin birth keep you from? It's our human nature. It's ours. He's assumed it. We're consubstantial with him, you know? So if our nature is totally depraved and sin is something inherent in our nature, then he would have had to assume it. You know, so you're being a bit of a trap there. I think you are anyway. That what you all of a sudden you're exempting Christ and not making that our humanity. And if you don't make it our humanity, like the church fathers said, what is not assumed is not healed. Like, Christ's incarnation is doing something. It's not just getting him to the cross, like in evangelical circles. Oh, he took on a body so he could go to the cross. Well, that's not just it. The thing is that, you know, this is salvific. He's joining God and man in himself, right? So all of a sudden I was challenged with all of these. And I mean, there was another heresy attending with monothelitism, which is monoenergism, which means, was there one energy in Christ, one activity that was free to operate, the divine? Or was there two, one according to each nature? And the church says, no, there has to be two. He has to freely act as man, not only as God. So again, if he can do that with our nature, how is sin inherent? How is depravity inherent? So the Christology took down my Calvinism, basically.
Right. At what point along this did you start questioning things like inerrancy? Like, was that kind of like after? Did you have inerrant, you know, kind of conservative versions of inerrancy while you became Orthodox, or did that happen before you kind of evolved away from that?
Yeah, that's interesting. It was kind of in that transition period was happening. It was a bit relieving because the Orthodox, they don't adhere to inerrancy.
No.
But you will hear them say that there's God's word is true, and you might hear them say that it's without error. But they're not inerrantists. You know what I mean? They're not relying on the Bible for their faith. That's that was kind of relieving.
Right. Yeah.
Because as Ravi, what was his name? Ravi Scam, your video, as he said, there's a lot more to, you start scratching the surface about canon and about where the scripture comes from and what was selected and all of those issues. You know, for them, it's obvious. Oh no, there is no sola scriptura.
Right.
And so there was a process there where sola scriptura for me was dead. That was one of the first things that went before I converted to Orthodoxy. But so their reliance on the Bible wasn't substantial enough. So, but after that, after I was long, you know, Orthodox, And it was interaction with you guys and with some of the online stuff where it kind of became an issue again, where even though I'm not evangelical, I was kind of, going after evangelicals on those things because I was learning about all the trouble with the text and opening myself up to critical scholarship and all of those type of things. And so, the inerrancy was kind of fading out. Well, it had been on its last legs just before I became Orthodox, for sure. But I hadn't really thought about it much. But added to the fact that the Bible isn't central to the Orthodox. I mean, it's the height of the tradition, but it's not, quoting it isn't your faith.
Right.
Because there was decades that the church had no scripture. None. No New Testament anyway. Right? So the church is operating long before the scripture's ever there. So that's not a problem for them.
Right.
But yeah, so inerrancy was dying in those days. But the learning about the textual stuff has kind of come in the last few years. And I love it. It's fascinating.
What was now that you opened yourself up to that, what do you think the biggest, silliest kind of reconciliations are by evangelicals now that you've kind of looked into it a little bit more, in your opinion? I mean, you could write a long list, but is there any particular ones that you just think are incredibly silly?
I just read. It's just not. It's just I have a bit of a list that I've got in my ESV study Bible that I use. My ESV study Bible I use as my Bible criticism stuff. It's full of notes and full of all the places where it's got issues, and I use that. And actually the ESV's notes, of course, defending most of this. And they actually are fairly good at highlighting some of the problem areas, but some of the answers are just laughable. And I wish I'd have wrote a couple of them down, but ridiculous answers. So I think it's the ridiculous answers that you get. Well, there could have been 2 Goliaths, and there could have been, because there's that mix up about who is it that actually killed Goliath. And I mean, I don't know. There's so many of them where it's so absurd. They think that if they just come up with an answer, that's, if not a refutation, it causes doubt. It's not reasonable doubt. It's stupidity. You're not being honest with the text. So much for sola scriptura. It makes me upset now. You can tell.
Yes. But I think you did a little. I mean, I don't know when there was a couple. I've looked at your YouTube channel briefly, and there was a video. It was stop lying.
I forget what it was even about, but yeah, I mean, you're not even. Some of them aren't even trying. There's some of the problem text that there's reasonable objections to and possibilities and stuff, and you can say, okay, that's I guess that's a possible, but most of them are embarrassingly ridiculous. It's just an excuse. You're not trying, because you've got an agenda to keep. And I was there, and I know what it's like. I remember. I remember there can't be anything wrong with this thing. You gotta either ignore or argue away, and that's terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even for me, it's not just the specifics. It's when you actually have let that idea in your mind that it's not inerrant, just reading the whole Bible over and over, it's just it just doesn't cohere. It's just not a coherent whole. Regardless of whether you want to point to specific details, once you untrain your mind to start the little GIF where the guy's got the string connections all over the board, once you untrain your mind to do that, you're just how did I think that this was a coherent whole in the way that I used to think it was? You could still say a more liberal doctrine of inspiration. You could still say that it still coheres in general themes or something like that, if you want to, but reading it that way, yeah. And it's funny too, David Bentley Hart, I still, as an Orthodox, it's so funny, he just takes so many shots at that kind of view of the Bible. I haven't finished it yet, but his book, I don't know if it's The Experience of God. It's a book where he's arguing in defense of the existence of God. But even in that book, just in the first couple chapters, just jab after jab at like fundamentalism. It's just so funny. Like it makes me laugh.
He's merciless, and it's beautiful. But I think it was Father Aidan Kimmel. I think I don't know if he's responded to you before, but he's an Orthodox priest. He was Catholic for a long time, but he has David Bentley Hart on his channel, went to post his writings a lot of times or whatever. But yeah, what was it he said? Yeah, no, it was another guy, but it was on his blog or whatever, that when the bullies get bullied, David Bentley Hart is involved. He's the bully that goes after the bullies.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I don't know. I mean, he probably goes overboard sometimes. And of course, a lot of it is for effect. But you know what? I mean, sometimes those things shake you up enough to say, okay, if somebody disagrees with you, just pay attention, see what he's saying.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one of those things I go back and forth with persuasion. Like I want to be, on the one hand, rigorous and but at the same time, I do take my jabs.
Oh yeah.
At concern.
You puppy kicker, you.
So I don't know. I think I try to find a balance, and it's hard. It's hard because I do think that there is something to that. Like there were conversations, because my brother was an atheist before. Well, actually, yeah, you probably saw that I identify as a tentative atheist now.
Yeah.
But he, there were confrontations we would have where I was trying to defend like Old Testament ethics, and he was very spicy with me on different occasions, and it got under my skin. It really did. It made me angry. But looking back, I think that was actually helpful. Even though if I were to do that to myself, I might have done it more carefully, just because more strategically. But I think sometimes that's why it's so hard to balance it. Like how much should you do it? How much should you not? But I definitely think there's value in kind of stirring people up to some degree occasionally.
When you thoughtfully fire an arrow, and not like the memes, and not like the radical atheists, not like the lowbrow type of stuff, right? But I mean, when you thoughtfully say something jolting, whether it be about the Old Testament genocide apologists or whatever, you're aiming for something, and it needs to have. But when it's done properly, it works, because I know it works for me.
Right.
It's worked for me over and over, right? But sometimes that heated up broadhead that hits the first time opens you up, because then sometimes you get mad or angry or offended or whatever. And so what does it make you do? It makes you go, okay, let's go find out more about this.
Right.
And pretty soon you find your pants are down. So I think when it's done well, you do it well. Amateur Exegete does it well. Some of the guys, on the Twitter feeds there, they do it really well and carefully, because I don't like the obnoxious stuff and the mindless stuff. But when it's done right, from a Christian side or from a non-Christian side, it works.
Yeah. That's the thing, is it really doesn't work when, like, if someone, if like some online atheist that clearly doesn't know what they're talking about tries to use that kind of bravado, then it just shuts people down, because like someone that's a well-read Christian could just let it, even if they have like a point to make somewhere in the vicinity of what they're trying to say, and the Christian can just like basically it can just bounce off, because they said it in a certain way that was uninformed.
Absolutely.
So it just doesn't, at that point, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, evolution, that's what got me out of evolution, was interacting with thoughtful, caring. And there was a couple of people who, like, I was on, I forget what it was some sort of platform, and all these comments coming in just going after you because you're a Christian, don't accept evolution. But it was the one or two guys that came in quietly, made their point firmly, sometimes with a little bit of an edge on it, to make you go, yeah, I do kind of think that, don't I? Or whatever. And those were the guys that got me out of, my anti-evolution silliness, and, my climate science denial, and all the conspiracy stuff or whatever. It's usually that gets you out, for sure.
That's this was not planned, but my next question was, how can we help people get out of like fundamentalism? So we were kind of already answering that question. Like, I mean, that's one aspect of having conversations and balancing, a little edge with being thoughtful. But do you have any other thoughts on that? I think we answered my next question.
Yeah. Don't go straight after there's no God. I mean, for me, and even now as a Christian, when I come up against fundies on evolution or climate science or conspiracies, whatever it is, often I will go to Christian sources and say, okay, here, read this. This is a biology professor. And there's a couple of, I got some good online sources of people, and he's a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why, this Barrowman origin to species theory fails. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, okay, well, they can't go, well, I'm not going to go to atheist sources. No, these are Christians. Here, go to Biologos. Go to some, go to Randall Rouser's, genocidal material where he takes on Paul Copan, and go to Tom Stark, who's a Christian, and see what he says. Oh, he's more scathing. What he says about Paul Copan's stuff, and there's Christians out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're a Christian, all of a sudden you can't just dismiss them out of hand because, they're kind of still in your camp, so it's the issue that needs to be dealt with.
Right.
So I think if atheists and the thoughtful atheists and that are, slow, methodical plotting and targeting and erratic, those are the ones that will be listened to by some of us as Christians. But yeah, point them to Christian sources that basically tell the truth. I mean, that's been formative for me. And you tell me I get to orthodoxy, and I'm not sure if Candida Moss is Catholic. Is she a practicing Catholic, I wonder, or is she just a Catholic scholar?
I'm not super familiar with all the in-depth New Testament study stuff, so I'm not sure.
I'm not 100% sure, but I mean, this is a source that's not, I mean, she's always on the news stations giving information to like CNN and, and other sites about what's going on when something happens in the Catholic Church. And she was at, what's that huge Catholic university in the States?
Notre Dame. She
taught there, and stuff like that. So, now you have a scholar that's highly regarded, and she's writing about the early church and about martyrdom and about, so that's the thing, is if you can give sources that aren't new atheist type or just obnoxious or go right after there's no God. Don't go right after that. So there's a lot of sources that get us out of our little silos, because it's worked for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I remember, well, before I move on to that, I was going to say, surprisingly, like, Sean McDowell, more, I guess we could say conservative apologist. He wrote a book about like pushing back against some of the rhetoric about the persecution or like the martyrdom of some of the apostles. And so like, he's actually pushed back against some of this apologetic. So I was actually pleasantly surprised about that.
Yeah.
But
there was something online I saw. I didn't watch it, but I think I saw that though.
Yeah.
That's good. Jeez, that's good. Because it's shocking. You don't know. Like she says in her book, all you've been told is that for 300 years, and even more mostly, but we all think that the church was persecuted nonstop, that it was just Romans hated Christians. And she just annihilates this. And she also connects it to today and say this persecution complex that Christians have or use for themselves often is just nasty and unfounded. So
where I forget what I was going to say something. Maybe it'll come to me. I was going to say something next to follow that up with, but I can't remember. Darn it. So where are you now with your beliefs? I'm not going to, I'll push you too hard. I just want to know, kind of where are you at now with your beliefs and all that stuff?
I don't know. I'm a Christian. I am a Christian because I haven't walked away.
Mm-hmm.
But part of it is the dynamic that, here's kind of the dynamic. my wife got sick in 2008, and she's chronically ill. And she was fall of 2008 through 2009 and into the spring of 2010. She was in hell. She suffered. And I ran her down to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and brought her back because we couldn't find help here. And they said, it's going to bankrupt you if we admit her, but why don't you go back and be a little more un-Canadian and push yourself into the emergency department there? Because we'd been several times. So anyways, my wife was suffering, and inhuman suffering. And that changed us. I mean, that broke us. I became Orthodox in 2012 after that, because after she got a medication in the hospital. We finally got into emergency at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, and she finally got admitted. And they tried a medication that brought her from darkness to light in 4 days.
Wow. And
we had been doing this for a year and a half. She would go, and I didn't believe her at first. She says, I haven't slept in days. And I said, honey, come on. Nobody can. You must have slept. And so I finally stayed up one time. She would go days and days without sleep. And she was hallucinating. I mean, she was in hell. And so that's why I would never wish hell on my worst enemy ever again, because you don't know what you're saying if you can wish suffering on anyone. But it broke us, and it's been underlying this whole time. I became Orthodox in 2012 because we came back to some sort of normalcy after she came out of the hospital, and so we were able to operate and function again a bit sort of normally. And so I went back to my studying to try and find out where I should be, and I became Orthodox and went through that for a while. But my church closed down here in town in 2013, at the end of 2013. The priest, it was very small. It was just a little mission parish, lots of Saturday night Vespers, which is a beautiful service, by the way. If Christianity is true, it has to be Orthodoxy, but I'm not so sure after that. But so most Saturday nights, I was the only one in the Vespers service. It was dark, and it was lightly lit, and it was beautiful. And but I'd be the only one. And anyway, so at the end of 2013, he just finally had to shut it down because it just wasn't, you couldn't finance it anymore. You couldn't uphold it anymore. But so then I was without a local church. So we started to try and go. It was about 45 minutes each way to a church in the city. And we did that a few times. But honestly, I haven't been to church regularly for a long time. And so it's a factor. If I had a church here, an Orthodox church, I would still just go, because you can go and stand there in liturgy and go through the services and worship and doubt all you know what I mean? It's not like an evangelical church where you've got to give an account for your every emotion and, evaluate every message and all that stuff. But so you can go to liturgy and you can just be quiet with God and with yourself and your thoughts and whatever. And I didn't realize how special that was. So that church is gone. And so it's kind of put me in a place, because of my wife's condition, that we don't really get to church. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's partly a factor, but, and then the more and more I've interacted with you guys and other things, I'm a Christian, but I'm not living like a Christian in the normal sense. Like, I read the Bible constantly for years. It's in my heart. I know it. It's there. But I don't read it to just read it. I haven't for some time. I'll read it to critique textually or to look up because I'm kind of on that right now. You know what I mean? So I'm looking for the stuff that's still new to me, that's what scholars say about it. And I already know what the evangelicals have said for my whole life. And I kind of know mostly what the Orthodox say. They don't say much about the scripture, but they got a lot to say about the tradition and the saints. But now that's got a lot of holes poked into it because of a couple of things I read. One was the book I showed you, and another one was a hagiographer in late 1800s who critiqued the saints' stories, the lives of the saints' stories, and he showed how they were repetitive, they were fanciful, they grew with time, they got more miraculous as they were told. And again, scholars can document this and say, oh, here's the first edition, here's the next you see in the centuries later. So all of this brings me to where I am, which is kind of, I don't know, the Catholics have rejected limbo, but I think I'm there right now.
Right.
So it's not easy, but for me right now, it's honest, I guess.
Yeah.
Because in one sense, there's things that make me think the way that the world is and the universe is, I don't know how that could be without God. Like there's certain things, consciousness and, certain levels of reality. And there's just things that still, I mean, there's good arguments against this stuff, but life from non-life and I mean, certain things or whatever, but just sitting here in this place is about all I can do right now. And I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you got to be honest with yourself. I mean, that's why I kind of stayed as an agnostic for a long time, because I don't like to change. I don't like to change what I'm identifying myself as, and then be like, well, I'm going to change my mind back and forth. I like when I choose something, I choose it like, because I've, sat in it and thought.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was not easy for me. And honestly, at least for me, I think I was this is more autobiographical, but I think moving from agnosticism to atheism, even if I say tentative atheism, was almost harder than Christianity to agnosticism. I don't know why.
It's like the final tie was severed or something.
Yeah, like I think it was more, it's because it's like I still have this hope. It's not faith. I still have a hope that like, some universalist picture is true. But
Right.
like just saying like I don't really believe it is. Like
Yes.
it's just hard to say that because
Yeah.
I want it to be true.
Yes.
Like, so for me, it was more, I think the more I kind of think about why did it take so long for me to just say, because atheism, as I've said, if you're on a spectrum and it's 50-50, whoops, put my hands in front of my mic. If you're on a spectrum and it's 50-50, if you lean like just a little bit over to the atheism, you could reasonably call yourself an atheist. You don't have to be a hard atheist.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, even though I think I kind of like didn't want to admit to myself that I was finally leaning in that direction. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, it's similar, I would say. I feel similar. I feel like, okay, I'm not cutting the umbilical cord of no divinity at this point because I'm not convinced of it. But I'm not doing the work right now either way. I'm kind of just sitting on here where I am, sort of. And like I say, it's not a comfortable place, but I just can't sever the tie because I don't think that yet. I don't think that. And like you had alluded to, you didn't think that for sure. You didn't commit to that yet.
Yeah.
And so you sat where you were. So yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any, well, I was going to ask you, I think I've asked you this before, but do you have any plans for future content, or do you just plan on having your Twitter, or you can write a guest post for me on my blog about Christology?
Yeah, I know you've said that to me and that, but the problem is that I've on my Twitter profile, I've put poor thinker. It's just a fact. I just, I don't have I'm not well enough read. I'm not
on Christology.
Not an original thinker. Sorry, what?
It's on Christology though. If you wrote a blog post on Christology though.
Yeah, I could. I could do that probably, but others have done it better than me. And so I often just link that to basically express what I'm saying, whatever, because I'm not an original thinker. I just am following after somebody else in some sense. So, but I guess we all do that. We learn from others and then we express it in our own way or whatever, I suppose. But
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not confident in my abilities, I guess, to to venture out into certain things. It'd be interesting, it would, but I'm not going to BS my way through when there's really smart people around me, like all around me, that know when it's shallow or when it's incomplete or when it's not, you don't have enough of a formed experience or opinion on it. So yeah, Twitter's good for now.
So as we're wrapping it up, so I think you also had one of your other videos. Like I said, I perused your videos. Also was like a tasting. I forget what kind of alcohol it was. So I'm assuming that's one of your hobbies is having a nice. What kind of was it? Cognac?
It was cognac on my channel, whatever. But those are embarrassing because I'm just a newbie. But I've been, like, you asked me what I'm doing in that, but I'm spending enough time on YouTube reviewing or watching whiskey reviews and watching all the female-led metal bands that I love, watching, and getting all the things I missed for all my Christian years.
Yeah.
So now I'm just, enjoying a lot of those things.
Yeah. Was it Nightwish? Is that what it's called?
Oh,
the band?
Man.
I can't remember.
Yes. There's others.
Yeah.
There's others. But one thing it is you don't realize how bad Christian music was until you got out and heard. And a lot of it is the Christians were, in my generation, I think it's changed quite a bit, but I think it's, you find a lot more of honest lyrical content in Christian music now, maybe, I suppose. I don't listen to it, but than my generation, like the 80s and even 90s and whatever.
Yeah.
Most of it is just sappy, preachy, shallow, like talking to your Christian bubble people. But you get out into, into the world's music. I don't know, the secular music, normal music. They're not afraid, and the best music comes out of darkness, or somebody's suffering, or the realities of death and of terrible or whatever, or the unimaginable beauty of things. Like Nightwish is not the last album that just came out, but the second last one. The whole it's a theme on evolution. The whole album is, and that's why they have Richard Dawkins quoting his voices on there several times.
Right.
So that's why I said to you, that's kind of new atheist and a little bit, but I mean, if you listen to the stuff, there's the writing is, and the music writing is just so complex, and it's, like I was missing all of this. So now I'm catching up on all of this stuff and finding, groups. There's a group here in Vancouver, Unleash the Archers, that's female led. It's amazing. And so music and learning about whiskey a little bit and interacting with all of you guys, learning some of the biblical stuff. I got to do more reading. I got to discipline myself to read more. I've got books, I'm buying them. I'm just not reading them. So I started scripting Jesus, amateur exegete. Said that was a good one. So I get going and then I stop and I get on my stupid YouTube stuff, waste my time. So I got to be more disciplined. But
I could be watching whiskey videos.
Hey,
I could be watching whiskey videos right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a whiskey video will be more entertaining for your public or your audience than this. So
no, this is good. No, but I appreciate you coming on. It was a good conversation. Thanks again
for having me. I appreciate it. Sorry it took so long, but with our move and with all of the stuff, it was a bit of a setback. So I appreciate interacting with you.
All right. Thanks.